Okay, today I'd like to recap about Eduardo Kac's radical poetry. Remember, in the first classes, we started with one of his navigational poems entitled Letter, that he published in 1996, that you can download and watch on Vimeo. It's a navigational poem that presents the viewer with the image of a three-dimensional spiral jetting off the center of a two-dimensional spiral. So both spirals are made exclusively of text, and the reader is able to grab and spin this cosmic verbal image in all directions. This means that reading becomes a process of probing the virtual object from all possible angles. The reader is also able to fly through and run the object, thus expanding reading possibilities. In Letter, a spiraling cone made of words can be interpreted as both converging to or diverging from the flat one. All texts are created as if they were fragments of letters written to the same person. It's not possible to distinguish to whom each fragment is addressed. The poem Letter is presented here as a video documentation of an interactive reading experience. So we could interpret this poem as the representation of a singularity projecting words, or see the poem as a quasar. In astronomy, it is defined by the Oxford Dictionary Online as a massive, extremely remote celestial object emitting exceptionally large amounts of energy. It also contains massive black holes and may represent a stage in the evolution of some galaxies. So we could maybe see it as a quasar, this poem by Eduardo Kac, because the poem entitled Letter could indeed represent a technological tool that comprises black holes, that is, moments of obscurity for us humans. The letter, in fact, can't be read because it escapes us. So here we could maybe see it as a suggestion that artificial intelligence is here creating words, poetry, and meaning that are too difficult to apprehend when we are striving to grasp the meaning of the jet that is constantly moving. Except if we stop the screen, it's almost impossible for us to catch sentences. Maybe the poem suggests that technology will surpass our human capacities. Maybe it is a criticism of computer-generated poems that in the end are beyond our control. It might also represent the fear of being overwhelmed by the culture of computer programming and creativity. So this letter, this spiral, might represent a technological singularity. A period during which the pace of technological change will be so rapid that human life will be irreversibly transformed. As a consequence, we will need to change our consciousness and change the way we construct meaning. Here the spiral establishes meaning in a semi-autonomous fashion. Here meaning is no longer mastered, no longer within a reach. It also echoes the idea of singularity in mathematics because it is defined as an infinity point, an infinite value. The poem here itself has limitless meanings. However, here the poem appears as self-sufficient, but behind there is still the creator's hand and brain that made it. Here the poem Letter includes dark parts, obscure meanings, and light meanings to be understood. As in Cubism, we can see these celestial objects from the side, with an oblique understanding, no direct apprehension, no transparency. In literature, the idea of quasars and Eduardo Kac's letter might also echo the idea of vortex. One image in a text is endowed with energy so that multiple meanings gravitate around the word. Vorticism was invented by the American poet Ezra Pound in 1914 to designate art that represented the dynamism of the universe. So here, that's the idea that reality can be fragmented with hard-edged imagery that is derived from the machine. So this spiral gives the impression of energy and the multiplicity of meaning indeed. Here the spiral toys with the observer that is only the receptor of impressions without being able to understand the words of the poem. Only the movement of the spiral is observable, making the poem a lively concept rather than a traditional poem to decipher. Like Jacob Epstein's radical sculpture, this is radical poetry that pushes the limits of understanding and challenges the reader to catch a glimpse of the poem in infinite movement. This is physically and intellectually ungraspable, as the object and its meanings are fleeting and fleeing as well. The spiral is offering reversed sentences. We entered at the heart of the jetty, and at the end we can grasp a few words like brought you back, never been the same. I'm quoting the text, what I can see from the spiral. Go back as soon as possible. Operation, photography, last year. The lexical field suggests that the poem invites for infinite attempts at understanding it, knowing in advance that this understanding will only be partial and imperfect, and that the concept of the poem is that there are parts of the world that will forever remain obscure to our conscience, like a quasar, which is too far away, too ancient, too nebulous among the infinite galaxies. The center of the black hole has an infinite value. So Eduardo Kac's goal, even with all the poetry that you could work on with the last class, in fact, his goal with this radical poetry or with all the poetry was to grasp, to stress the ungraspable nature of meaning, life and nature, and to create new codes, moving language beyond the ordinary, to create instability, to stretch the imagination, to infer new feelings and new ideas. So instead of having the fixity of the printed signs, you are submerged, overwhelmed, but also absorbed by the fluid signs of the poem. The fluid signs of hollow poems as well. So if we look at all the poetry explained by Eduardo Kac, I would summarize it saying that all the poetry appeared during the 80s with the idea that the linear perception of the text, it's echoed in letter in fact, could be completed with spatial observations and the temporal dimension. So here language moves and changes in space and time. The linguistic elements from the work can suddenly disappear and reappear. So here poetry is closer to visual arts, to graphic arts. And the reader is forced to read the text with its dynamism. You have to view the text from various angles, potentially change directions as words float on the surface of the poem. So the reader here creates his own text when looking at the text, up and down, back to forth, from left to right, from right to left. One of the hollow poems that Eduardo Kac wrote in 1986 was entitled Chaos. Here, the hologram tries to figure out and orchestrate the idea and concept of chaos precisely. Letters are spatially arranged so that the word partly obscure, partly luminous can help readers experiment visually the idea of an unsettling experience. We experience chaos visually. We also have the impression that words are moving, that they are animated. Readers can apprehend the letters with their left eye, their right eye, or both, and the normal alphabetical combination of letters that form the word chaos are here turned upside down to create fragments that better render the event of chaos. So visually, we experience chaos through this hologram, through this holo poem. In Quando, created in 1987 by Eduardo Kac as well, the poem is structured around an abstract space. As the observer turns it reveals and conceals words. It's a 360-degree digital whole poem. The poem, which floats in the air inside a cylinder, is seen in a 720-degree space. And this change produces, of course, new meanings. That's its main interest. So you can read it clockwise, you can read it in Spanish, you can change, in fact it changes, the verses and the meanings change according to the direction that you take. You can read "the light deceives, the lens slowly," or "the light lies, slow the lens deceives." So either it can be the light that deceives, or it can be the lens that deceives and the light that shows. Another interesting poem is Phoenix, which is a laser transmission hologram written in 1989. And here, as I wrote on the online written document, it represents the letter W, which can be interpreted as a hand that handles fire, or a red bird ready to take wing. So it might symbolize our ancestral fascination with fire, or the burning desires of the subject. So to summarize, we could say that Eduardo Kac invented a poetry that moved beyond the printed page. Obviously, he started with holo poetry, and then he invented cyber poems on his own. So it's an immaterial poetry in tune with our contemporary digital world. He also was influenced by the experimental poems of E. Cummings. He was influenced in his career as a holographer and as a computer animator. And when he read E. Cummings, he himself experimented with visual syntax and the lonely word or syllable on the page. So the idea for Eduardo Kac and E. Cummings is to make readers treat the poem as a field, as part of an open space. So the poem itself becomes a network, becomes an hypertext that has got links and connections the reader has to play with. And I think that this led after to hypertextual poetry we're going to see with Stephanie Strickland. Eduardo Kac is also renowned for his focus on bioart and his fascination for mixed states, the interaction between man and the machine, between his DNA and a petunia flower plant, between a rabbit genetically modified and a jellyfish. So he mixes states, and he makes art out of this. So in an interview, he explained that artists had to create from real objects that married states of art or states of nature to stimulate our imagination and modify our vision of society. In a digital poem entitled Perhaps, written in 1998, the reader is invited to choose between 24 avatar words. So according to your initial choice when you read it, you will have a specific semantic experience within the poem. You can create your own syntax. You can create your own word and words with the click of the mouse. So it really creates potential textual encounters for the reader. In his holo poems, Eduardo Kac plays with the transformational powers of the linguistic sign. It's possible for him to play with, for example, the nouns that are turned into adjectives. So he plays with grammar, like E. Cummings, he plays with typographical shapes. And there is an intermediary state, and the idea is to urge readers to apprehend letters visually, but non-semantically, before they turn into a meaningful unit and a semantic unit. So there is a moment of abstraction that prevents understanding when letters are moving and in the process of changing from one word to another. So this really runs counter to our usual linguistic and semantic expectations. It's as if he created fluid signs and a word that is lively, that is alive, that is in process. And this idea is taken by Channel 5, the logo from the BBC in 2006, where you can see a short work that reflects the biological process of conception based on love, or that ends up with love. So we first distinguish sexual cells, and then in an intermediary moment, we can see abstract signs or in-between shapes that have no fixed meaning to end with the word love. So in fact, we have sexual shapes that are transformed into the words love, but in between there is no fixed meaning. So this is kinetic typography, and that will lead to animated media poetry that uses this process. The use of letters, the use of moving things that are in an interplay between two different unstable identities. So in digital poems, we've got the same system with one sign that gives way to another sign, and they are at one stage in an in-between state. And so you have to accept this instability, this uncertainty. Because uncertainty is also part of life, part of biotechnology, part of living organisms that he plays with. This fascinating poem, he plays with that aspect of poetry as that can be part of non-verbal creation, paraverbal or verbal creations.